Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Juan Wash Process Peru from Coffee Collective. There's the container right there. And Coffee Collective, based out of Copenhagen, Denmark. And this is part 8 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series. And Coffee Collective is a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel pretty regularly, as they are my favorite Danish coffee roaster. And I was quite happy to see this coffee featured in the Advent calendar, as I'd been wanting to try it for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like Peru's been having a pretty good year. And two, I've really enjoyed the Central and South American coffees I've had from Coffee Collective. So the combination of those two factors made this a coffee I definitely wanted to try. And again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting wheel are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex, and Coffee Collective does have a brew guide on their website. It is a 15.625 to 1 water to coffee ratio, and they suggest between 92 and 95 degrees Celsius. And since we've been going with the warmer side of those temperatures, we opted for 95 degrees Celsius for this one. Now, in terms of roast profile, Coffee Collective is notorious for being on the lighter side, even relative to a lot of other Nordic coffee roasters. This one, on the other hand, feels like arguably the most developed coffee I've ever had from them. So definitely think of this one on the more developed side of a light spectrum. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. First impression, right from the start, the cup really dove heavily into the chocolate attributes, as it was much more on the darker side of a chocolate from that first impression. It felt very rich and robust, as well as full-bodied, complemented by this brightness that came from the cup. So citric attributes were the second most dominant characteristic to it, and they did have a chocolate and lime note listed on here, and both of those things made a lot of sense, as the lime definitely was the kind of contrasting factor to what was a very heavy and dark chocolate base to the cup. Chocolate was on both ends, as it was present early and throughout, especially in the finish as well. Just a heavily dominant factor within the coffee itself. There is a slight bit of herbality to the cup, but it's really tertiary relative to what felt like a very strong chocolate base. Again, distinctly that dark chocolate, and then the citrus acidity that was contrasting the chocolate as well. Now, I really like this coffee significantly more through the Chemexes. I feel like the Chemex does a really good job of balancing out those factors. The citric brightness isn't quite as bright, and the chocolate isn't quite as heavy, but rather the cup as a whole feels a little bit more moderate in general to some factors that really seemed to kind of dominate the cup when brewed through the V60. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, and a bunch of level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. The body at a level 4, yes, and that's one of the first things I mentioned, was this coffee felt very full-bodied. One of the heaviest bodied cups of coffee we've had throughout this entire Advent calendar up to this point, and I would definitely say that it justifies that level 4 mark. Obviously, through the Chemex, it's not quite as full-bodied. I would bump that down to a level 3, and I don't mind sacrificing body, especially since level 3 is still kind of high, especially for a Chemex, in kind of comparison to a lot of the other things that you might get from the coffee if you do substitute brew methods. Cleanliness, level 4. It is on the lower side of level 4, and I think that's kind of attributed to the fact that it is a kind of heavy chocolate in general, and in addition to that, the herbality can feel slightly undefined to me. So while it is at that level 4 mark, it's on the lower side of level 4, I think the Chemex does a really good job of kind of cleaning that up, and that's a true level 4 mark. Finish, level 4. Yes, and I've been mentioning that the chocolate had a lasting finish to it, but so did the brightness. So both of those things are kind of contrasting in the finish, but you get plenty of both of them, the brightness to the cup as well as the more robust chocolate to the cup as well. So that one's a true level 4 as well. Acidity, level 4. Yes, that's kind of interesting. At the warmer temperatures and through the Chemex, it's not quite as pronounced, but once the cup did cool down through the V60, it definitely became a lot more pronounced of a characteristic within the cup. Through the Chemex, I could arguably justify it at level 3. It's on the lower side of level 4, and we'll kind of discuss that a little bit more with the sweetness, but level 4 for the V60 after a little bit of a cool down. Citrus, level 4. Yes, the lime characteristic was by far the second most dominant factor within this coffee. Slightly less pronounced through the Chemex as well, so it's one of those things where definitely justifying that level 4 mark, regardless of which brew method you're going with. Chocolate, level 4. Yes, that's the first thing I mentioned, was this cup of coffee was a very chocolate forward cup of coffee, very much on the darker side of things. And it's very much a true level 4. I could possibly say the higher side of the level 4, but I think it's actually right where it belongs as well. Bunch of level 3, so let's start with the smokiness and the bitterness, because I feel like those two things kind of go hand in hand with what was this really dark chocolate attribute. Now, the bitterness, most specifically, it can be attributed to both things, the citrus as well as the chocolate, because it was a, well, dark chocolate, which can feel a little bit more bitter, and the citrus could also feel a little bitter. So I think those two factors played a role in that being at that level 3 mark. Smokiness, level 3. I was kind of deciding between a level 2 and a level 3 for that mark because it was a little bit more heavy. However, I just kind of wanted to demonstrate just how robust the chocolate felt in the cup through that brew method. So I pushed that all the way up to the level 3 mark. Now, in addition to that, the savoriness and the spice are also at a level 3, and I mentioned that there was a slight herbal component to the coffee, but nowhere near as pronounced as the other two dominant factors to the cup. So that's why they kind of stay there at that level 3 mark. But one thing I really wanted to discuss on, and probably the most important thing, is that sweetness at the level 3. That's always going to be a sticking point to me. I think maybe I was hoping this coffee would be a little bit more sweet than it turned out to be. It's sweeter through the Chemex, and what I was saying about the acidity was the acidity is a true level 4 and the sweetness is a true level 3 for the V60. But with the Chemex, you can bump up the sweetness to a higher side of level 3 and the acidity to a lower side of level 4, and that kind of makes it a little bit more even of a cup of coffee for me. So that's the main reason I enjoyed this coffee a lot more through the Chemex. The chocolate also didn't feel quite as dark and heavy through that brew method. But other than that, I think this is pretty accurate of what I was getting from the V60. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, it wasn't necessarily my favorite. This kind of goes in line with the fact that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of chocolate, and I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of citrus, and through the Chemex, it was significantly better. But even then, it's not necessarily my favorite Coffee Collective coffee. I don't necessarily have anything wrong with it. It just wasn't necessarily my flavor profile in general. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though, just kind of like I said with the previous Kopi coffee, which had a lot of body to it. This one has a lot of body to it. This one's a little bit more of a traditional coffee drinker. So if you like the more heavy attributes to it, most distinctly the robust chocolate that comes from coffee, it is contrasted pretty heavily by what is a pretty strong citric attribute to it. But I imagine that this coffee would come out really well if you brewed it through something a little bit more neutral, like an automatic coffee maker, because the factors in this coffee can feel a little dominant at times, because through the Chemex a little bit more balanced, but through the V60 just so strong in the direction that this coffee was going. So it makes it a little bit of a tricky recommend, because I want to say a kind of classic traditional coffee drinker, but at the same time it has some modern attributes to it as well that kind of contrast that. So I guess if you like darker chocolate and you like a lot of citric brightness to it, then I think those factors would make this a good option for you with a fair bit of body as well. I think for the most part though, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Juan Wash Process Peru from Coffee Collective. Thank you for watching.